started. Yes. Hello to the future. It's 2017. I didn't have that prepared at all, and came up kind of lame again. But
it came out okay.
Okay, cool. So yeah, there are a bunch of things that happened since the last meeting, because I think that we may have skipped one, and then the one before it was the whole team API first thingy, and so a bunch of things happened. And if you're watching this recording, we moved towards pushing this into, or proposing this for acceptance into core. And there is an issue. It's got some response. People are giving positive feedback, but again, the Drupal community is usually very polite and very welcoming to new ideas. So I don't expect people that have bad things to say about this proposal to go there and make a big rant on the issue. But
I don't agree with that, actually. I think if people think this is a bad idea, they will let it know. I've seen it happen before.
Cool. Well, that's fantastic then. Yeah, I really want to get some honest criticism on this, because if it's not a good idea, I mean, I don't really care. I mean, I think this can just live just fine in contrib if we don't think that this is like baseline Drupal, needs to be shipped with every Drupal. But yeah, that being said, this and the auth 2 proposals are kind of stalled at getting some product and framework manager approval. I know that Dries wrote about wanting this going forward, and I don't know if that counts as an implicit okay or green light, but I would rather to have something explicit in that issue, right?
Yeah, and that's actually what is going to happen, or needs to happen indeed. Which of course, like we want to work on these things anyway, so we're not actually blocked in the sense that we can't do anything. We can continuing to make things better, and that's what we're already doing. But yes, we need explicit +1s, and this is discussed, I forget how often, but there is a weekly or bi-weekly committer call where they discuss these kinds of issues. And it's been vacation period, right? So that's definitely part of the reason why we haven't gotten a response yet.
Right, makes a lot of sense. I was just bringing this up because I didn't know if we needed to submit a patch so they could kind of get an idea of what we are thinking, or we didn't need to submit a patch.
The official procedure is that we open an issue like this to gauge community interest and get initial feedback in the sense of yes, that's a good idea, or no, please don't do that sort of thing. And so the feedback we've gotten so far is only positive. Some people are making are posting questions. Are you sure this is the right direction, or are you sure you want to use that library, that sort of thing? But there is no firm negative response. There are a fair number of followers on the issues. So I think all the signals are looking good. And indeed, Dries having blogged about it, or about JSON API, GraphQL, all the API first things some time ago, is an implicit +1, as in he's in favor of that direction. But that doesn't mean that it's already got a green light. The green light needs to come from framework manager and core committer.
Cool.
Well, I don't know the exact people, but we'll get that confirmation, or that ask for more specific information, because that's the one thing that is missing. A plan. So we need to. The official process means that you do this thing first, and then you propose, and you can do it at the first time. We could have already done it by now if we wanted to, but we gauged interest first. That's fine. But the next step is to come up with a firm plan, as in months X to Y, we are going to make sure it's experimental and ready for experimental. then there needs to be a plan for it to become a stable module over time. So if we get this in 8.3, you always get up to 2 releases to get it to a stable point. So 8.5, it needs to become stable. So we need to show that we have a plan towards stability in 8.5. That is the only actual other requirement. But in our case, the beauty is that we don't have any problems with data migration and so on, because we're just exposing data, and we're exposing access to data creation methods, but we're not storing any data whatsoever. So that makes things a whole lot easier in terms of backwards compatibility, data migration, and so on. And so for us, it's fairly simple. It's just, in the case of JSON API, it's implement the spec, prove that the spec works, prove that there's no bugs. So if we can, we have that issue somewhere for automatically validating every JSON API response, that would go a long way to proving that our implementation of JSON API is compliant with the specification. So I think that, for example, would be a very good indicator combined with test coverage. So in our case, I think it's fairly easy to come up with a plan. It's just that we need to show that we have a timeline with probably, in our case, some buffer time to show that, yes, we believe this can become stable by 8.5. So I don't think it's going to be difficult to come up with a plan like that.
Okay, cool. Nice. So auth 2 is a completely separate thingy. I think it's not as ready as JSON API, because I think that there are some design approaches to be discussed in there, and we don't even have consensus on what grants we want to include inside of Cora, what grants we want to have inside of the eventual contrib module. So more discussion needs to happen, and we cannot expedite that. I mean,
no.
that will happen whenever people want that to happen. So.
Yep. Yeah, but so far I think it's Daniel Weiner who's the only one who's really talked about which grants the issue. Is that right? And of course, he's already worked with you, with both of us. So I think we'll be able to get feedback from him on your proposal of which grants you think make sense to have in core. I think we'll get that fairly soon. But yes, that's the one thing maybe. But of course, we can also just specify in a plan that we start with just the one grant and then add another one before we reach 8.3 if time allows for it. So you can say we agree on this one grant being by far the most important one, and then even after 8.3.0 is released, we can add another one. Because it's an experimental module, we can make additions even while Drupal 8.3 is already out. We don't have it to be feature complete by 8.3.0.
Oh, I see. That's interesting, because that gets out of the way most or completely the design discussions that I had in mind. Because if that is the case, or that is the approach that we think that would be better, we could just propose to include the password grant and the refresh grant, which is, the refresh grant is not like a official or a grant like the other ones. It's just, you know, a nice thing to have. It's just exchange a token for another token. So with password credentials, the code, it gets much simpler, and we don't have to have this this weird thing that we link to a user in the client credentials grant. The client credential would be like when running an authorization for a cron that happens in a Java server, for instance, right? Where no user is actually executing that, but you cannot say that to Drupal because no user doesn't exist. It's either anonymous or one user, and also Drupal assumes that there is always a user object, the current user object, to store things like authorship and stuff. So if we don't include client credentials at the beginning, we can just work on getting this as an experimental module with password and refresh grants, and in parallel foster the discussion of the design of client credentials.
Yep, exactly. So and maybe even just focus on one of them, like the password grants. I think everyone sees there is a solid use case for that. So it's okay to even just say, let's do that as the MVP. And then we think it's very likely that we can also do, for example, the refresh grant. But that's not something we include in the initial implementation and in the initial commit, simply to keep the scope as small as possible and to have something that is workable, usable, and committed sooner rather than later. So just saying that that's possible.
Yeah, cool. That works too. I mean, adding the refresh grant is just adding a very, very small plugin class, but
just for the sake of discussion, it's one less thing to discuss. But if everyone is on board, then yeah, we can totally do it in the first commit. But of course, if it's a small thing to add, then it should also be pretty simple to add in a second commit, right?
Correct. So, yes, agree. Okay, I will take that approach and comment that on the issue, or suggest that approach. So what else? So some issues got knocked down during the holidays, and we added some extra test coverage, and I believe that every blocker that you may have for the refactor is now out of your way, I think.
I was just reviewing one issue that you had posted, the one with the API JSON format stuff, and I was looking into what to do next for the preparing for Drupal core stuff that I've been working on. So I'm not fully up to date. I looked at what else has been done, and indeed several bug fixes landed, several issues with additional test coverage landed, all great. So yeah, for me, the next step is to continue to push forward what I was working on before the holidays.
Right.
So the cleanup JSON API resource thing.
Exactly. And
so
then
I'll paste the issue link for those who are following. We're saying, and then
the only missing thing for core readiness, I think, will be the link manager stuff, which I know I kind of tried this and I got into the mud.
Yeah, I think it's fine to keep it as is for now, to be honest. It's just that we'll need to change that for sure. But yeah, it's blocked on that other core issue, and that one I worked on quite a bit, and we thought it was ready, but then there is an edge case where it doesn't work. So we don't need to block JSON API on refactoring other stuff to make JSON API more elegant, right? So we can totally do that later on.
Right, and that kind of goes the same way for the exceptions serialization, I think.
Yeah, maybe. I need to look at that one again. But I think the one thing that would be super valuable and very convincing for people reviewing the JSON API patch for Drupal core, if you will, when we get that posted, is if we would have test coverage that proves that all JSON API responses do match the JSON schema that the JSON API spec defines. And I've got an issue for that, and I think Chris has started working on that. I'm not entirely sure though, but I think that would be a very valuable one to have. And I know that Chris wanted to work on it, so I'll check with him. He's still asleep at this time, I think, or it's quite early there.
Yeah,
so I'll check that, and hopefully he'll get that done.
Maybe we should try to find a time when he can join us. Because it's a shame.
Well, actually, it's a vacation still officially at Acquia. It's a global observed all day. That's why, because it is actually 10 a.m. there, so he should be up.
No, but I mean, oh, okay. So you're saying that this time may be good for him after all.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Good, good. So yeah. Apart from that, I don't think I have anything else to discuss.
Nope. I think we'll have more to discuss next week, because I expect to be able to make good progress this week, and then hopefully next week we'll be discussing the details of how we want to get this, the actual patch posted and proposed, I would say.
Right.
So
cool. So what do you think about the idea of dropping the underscore format query string altogether?
Yeah, that's the thing I was just reviewing. I proposed that, and I discussed it with Chris, my colleague, and Matt, also a colleague. And I think, so I proposed two things. Either we allow it to be dropped, which is what you're currently doing. I think that makes it's better to some extent, because it's one less thing you have to do right, and it looks kind of strange and so on. But the other thing we could do is to require that you also send a correct accept header, which is actually, speaking in terms of restfulness and so on, that's the right thing to do. But Drupal core doesn't support accept header based negotiation for very good reasons, as in reverse proxies, and proxies get in the way, and then cache pollution, and then you get HTML when you're requesting JSON and vice versa, that sort of thing. That's why we don't support accept headers. That's why we have that query string underscore format equals something. But what we can do in our case, in the case of JSON API, because we are not serving multiple formats, we're serving a single format from a prefix URL. So we know that it's always going to be JSON API in the response, nothing else. So there is no danger of pollution. So what we can do is we drop the query string altogether, but at the same time also require an accept header to be sent, which is the proper thing to do. So it's something we can consider doing.
So I didn't see any clean way to do this without doing a core patch or swapping the HTTP middleware negotiation service.
No, there isn't a clean way, and actually we can hack it in for now until we figure out a more elegant way in Drupal core itself. And the way is very simple. You have a central JSON API controller, right? So in that controller, we can simply check, did the request include an accept header, and did that accept header include JSON API? If so, we respond. If not, then we throw the appropriate HTTP error response.
Right.
And that's pretty hacky, but
so yeah, the two things that I'm feeling a bit hesitant about that approach are one is that we are failing late in the process. So we are doing a bunch of work to bootstrap Drupal for something that we know early on that won't work. And two is that I don't know what are the ripple effects of doing something, of doing all this JSON API work, but having core belief that the format of this is HTML until we get to the controller, right? Because
I don't think we'll. Yeah, I need to look at the patch itself, but if we ignore for one moment how exactly it is implemented, so ignore the implementation details. What do you think about the principle of dropping the query string? I think you're +1 on that, and or because the second thing is optional, and B, requiring that accept header to be sent. Do you think it makes sense, or do you think it is an unnecessary requirement?
No, I think that B is very important, because You see, that's the way the spec is written, right? And we have
Exactly.
to respect it, even if we feel that we are more flexible, but not requiring it because we are already implying it with the route prefix. But I don't know. I don't want to make assumptions because other libraries are built around this, and the closer to the spec that we are, the safer that we will be
Exactly.
in the future.
Yep.
So
Okay.
I agree on B. On on
Oh,
A,
you don't necessarily agree on A, so you want to keep the query string or
what I'm
that's
saying.
interesting.
So what I'm saying for the query string is that I'm kind of in between the two solutions, right? Like we, as in the Drupal community, are used to negotiate formats using the underscore format string, and avoiding that to happen is going to require work. So, and on the other hand, in the web development community, we are used to negotiate formats using the accept header. So, I mean,
Well, that's not entirely. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
given that we want to support the accept header, and I think that we agree on that we want to keep the accept header, leaving support for underscore format may also make sense.
Hmm.
So we either have the
As in, it's optional. Is that what you're saying?
yeah.
Are you saying allow the query string thing to be dropped, but then require an accept header,
Mm-hmm.
or require not an accept header to be sent, but then and only then require a query string?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Or is that what you're saying? Or are you saying just make the query string stuff completely optional? It's always okay to send the accept header because that's what the spec says. But if people want to send the query string, that's fine.
No, I'm referring to the first one. That you can
Interesting.
that you can use one of the two negotiation formats that
Yeah.
we have available. So yeah, I don't know. That's the approach that the this patch takes. Like that's nothing because there is no good way to avoid negotiation based on underscore format.
No, there isn't. No, because that's the way that we made it in Drupal for, again, very good reasons.
Right. Yes.
But by the way, it's not true that most web developers and most APIs on the web use the accept header, because actually the opposite is true in the sense that pretty much all major APIs, the ones that Facebook use, the ones that GitHub uses, and so on, they all use, they basically don't offer multiple formats. Pretty
Right.
much always.
Yeah.
They offer a single format, so they avoid this problem. Or they have the ability to specify something like mything.json or mything.xml or mything.something, and that .something is the thing that determines what format it's served in. So pretty much nobody on the open web uses accept header-based negotiation, precisely for the reasons that Drupal doesn't support it by default, because it gets in the way when there's proxies in between. And that's not a problem when you're building custom apps, because then you can control how things are sent and whether there are proxies in between. But if that's not the case, then you need to be really careful. And that's really a problem.
Right. So one of the
But
things
so
that I did to kind of address that a little bit is adding a cache context on the accept header that I don't think is going to be used a lot. But if you don't add the accept header, but there is a version of the same request with the accept header, you don't get that cached version. right? You get an error saying you don't have the accept header.
Okay, yeah, I'll need to look into the actual patch, and I'll try to figure out a way to. So I just outlined two possibilities of how to make which things to make optional when. I'll try to look into that because I dug into the routing system a long time ago as well. So I'll be able to figure out a way. But it's problematic to add a cache context that varies based on the accept header, simply because normalizing the accept header is almost a science of its own, because the accept header that many browsers send, for example, is like anything can be in there. So in other words, it's very easy to have many clients, each sending a different accept header, which means that you generate a different cache entry for every single one of the possible values of the accept header. It needs to be normalized first, and only then can you reliably use it. So it needs to be normalized to just HTML or just JSON or just something. But just using the header is hugely problematic. And it's less problematic for JSON API, but it's in the sense that we are always serving the same response anyway. And probably most clients are going to send every single time the exact same accept header. But it's still possible that it's not the case, and the malicious user can very easily then cause many cache entries to be created in Drupal by just sending JSON API requests that sets an accept header to 1, then to 2, then to 3, and so on, and it would result in a different cache entry for every single one of those.
I see. So we would need to have something like cache context, a custom cache context that uses the negotiated format.
Yes, and we actually already have that. That's what yes, we have that, but it's not using the accept header. That's the thing. It's using the format query string.
Oh, but I thought that we could read the request.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're sending a link here. We could read the request to see the format that was negotiated, either via the query string or the accept header.
Yes, if depending on how you implemented accept header based negotiation, but by default, Symfony will, Drupal 8 will ignore the accept header in principle.
Yeah, I think that request format may just work.
Yeah, we'll need to look into it.
Yeah.
But I will review the patch and I will give more useful feedback than what I can give right now.
So yeah, I just wanted to make sure that moving away from underscore format, like moving away from Drupal way of doing things, was the right way in this case.
So maybe it's better to not do this stuff in this patch and just focus on the original scope was that it was not clear why it was called API_JSON, but I guess solving that doesn't really solve anything. So yeah, never mind. We can do this patch as is, but just saying that dealing with this sort of thing, accept header based negotiation, as in new ways of doing content negotiation, that's a big can of worms that we probably don't want to be spending time on at this stage. We can deal with this later, I would say.
Cool. Yeah, I
something already in core.
I don't anticipate the underlying code of this to change a lot, so this patch may just work in the future as well.
Okay.
But it would be great.
I'll definitely review it then.
Yeah, cool.
Yep. But I'm hopeful that we can make very good progress this week. So hopefully by next week we'll be all euphoric and yay and so on.
All right, perfect. Then I really now have nothing else to add.
Okay, me neither.
Cool. I guess I'll talk to you in IRC.
Yeah, and
sorry.
see you next week.
Sorry.
Oh.
No, sorry.
Yep.
Gosh, I forgot. I did something. I did a prototype of what I think that the schemata module could look like to serve us better, like in the sense of not using REST plugins for this, because then we have to depend on the REST module, etc. So that's just a workaround to not say that I forked the module, the schemata module. But yeah, I sent a link to the issue queue of the schemata module, saying, hey, this is what I think that a simplification could look like. Would you be interested in doing so? And yeah, we'll see what happens. Like, let me post a link in here.
Yeah, already find it.
Okay.
Posted it, I think.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Already find it. And yes, that sounds great. I'll pass it on to Ted, who will surely be interested in this stuff. So I think he'll have thoughts.
Cool. Perfect. Now, that's it.
All right.
If I remember something I once said.
That's okay. All right. Have a great weekend. See you next Monday.
Yep,
Bye-bye.
you too. Bye-bye.